All right. So we are from Nevada State College for their School of Nursing. I'm Alejandro.
I'm Cassius.
I'm Sierra.
Capri Marshall.
Rhonda Tucker.
And we're doing a quality improvement project on collapses and clotting bundles maintenance in the Spring Valley Hospital. All right.
Got it. Okay.
So our problem is an observation of CAUTI and CLAPSES maintenance bundle implementation on Unit 1 and Unit 2. This is what we did for our quality improvement project. So what are CAUTIs and what are CLAPSES? CAUTIs are catheter-associated urinary tract infections, and CLAPSES are central line associated bloodstream infections. And these account for the largest population of hospital-acquired infections, and they're still evolving. So these ultimately lead to complications in a hospital. And every year, 25% of the patient population will suffer from a hospital-acquired infection. Catheter-associated urinary tract infections are the most prominent, and 75% of patients are affected, approximating 9,000 deaths annually. CAUTIs are accountable for approximately $450 million per year in healthcare expenses in the United States. Central line associated bloodstream infections are most alarming. Millions of central venous catheters are placed annually, and an estimated healthcare cost of $5,734 to $22,930 is related to CLAPSES. Over 25% of infections lead to mortality. So not only are healthcare acquired infections dangerous, they are also costly at the same time. So anytime a catheter is inserted, you're automatically at risk for an infection at the site of injury.
Okay, so what we did was we took the bundles that you guys already use and we went through the lists and decided what we were able to assess. A lot of it was not relevant to what we're able to do because we're not there when they're placed, we're not there when they do the dressing changes. So really all we could assess is proper securement, if it seemed as if there was proper maintenance of the site or the area, so perennial care for the catheters, or CHG bathing if the patient was able to communicate, asking them if that had been done. So this is the list of the things that we needed to check for the central lines. It was making sure the biopatch was there. The date was associated with the most recent Sunday as long as it wasn't soiled or damaged or lifting. It wasn't supposed to be secured with tape, and it was supposed to be dry and intact completely. Big thing on the central lines is we were looking for the swab caps all the way down the tubing if they were connected to a tube. If not, they needed to have the swab caps on all hubs that were present. And on the urinary catheters, it was more about making sure that the system stayed closed, so no portals of entry for bacteria, making sure it seemed as if perennial care had been done, no tubing or kinks, and that the bag is below the bladder to prevent backflow, etc. And that was the list of things that we could take from the bundles that we could cross-check on the 2 units that we did overview. So according to JCAHO, as far as healthcare associated infections, the large majority of them take place more than 5 days after insertion, whether that's insertion of a Foley catheter or insertion of a central line, suggesting that it would in fact be a hospital acquired infection because it is so long after the initial placement. So for the data collection process, we went to Unit 1 and Unit 2, and we went at different times of the week, different times of days. We went during night shift and day shift and different days so that we could come in contact with different nurses and different nursing staff and leadership. And in Unit 1, the amount of central lines and Foley catheters were a lot smaller than Unit 2. Unit 2, it was as if almost every patient, almost every time, had both a central line and a Foley. So the data is definitely depicting that because the numbers are much different between both units because of the overall percentage of patients we were able to assess between the two units.
Okay. So for the major findings, with the compliance to the maintenance bundles, we see here that Unit 1 was more compliant with the Foley catheter. But you gotta take into consideration that Unit 1 had a less amount of patients that actually needed the Foley catheter as well as the central line. That's why, you know, they have a higher maintenance rate. Unit 2, they had more patients that required more, you know, central lines, more Foley catheters and all that. So they, you know, the more patients, the more time consuming and all that is. So that's why we see the difference between the compliant rate here. So for the major findings, on both units, they're very similar. For the central lines, we took a look and we found that the dressings were not changed on appropriate dates or upon becoming soiled. We also found that some swab caps were missing from the tubing. So not every cap was placed on the tubing. For the Foley catheters, same thing on Unit 1 and Unit 2. We found that there was loops in the tubing. A lot of catheters were not secured onto the patient, you know, whether it be the thigh and all that. And peritoneal care was not continuous as well. That's what we found. Basically, they're the same things on both units. We found similar results.
So that leads us to the recommendations for Quaddy. The recommendations that we came up with pretty much revolved around the leg bands, the securement straps for the tubing for the urinary catheters. A lot of times the tubing was not connected to the securement device, though many of the findings we found, because we do have a great team of nurses here at Spring Valley, the majority were secured, but there were also a measurable amount that were not. So one of the recommendations, the main one that we came up with, is that possibly when the charge nurses make their rounds on the unit, if they could actually take just a second or so to lift up the blanket or the sheet to see if the securement device actually has a tubing connected to it. We found through evidence-based practice that tubing that is not connected, or if the tubing is yanked too much from the urethra, whether a male or a female, the injury does actually add to the incidence of CAUTIs. Something as simple as ensuring that the securement is in place is something that will save the hospital time and money, and it will also decrease overall the patient's length of stay. It also affects reimbursement for the hospital because we all know that if a patient incurs infection at the hospital actually incurs that cost, and it's also bad for the patient as well. So we were thinking with maybe if the charge nurses, we know they're busy, but they are a great resource on the floor. So while they do the rounds during the shift, if that can be one thing to just check off just for the securement strap, that will greatly affect the overall incidence of CAUTI, aside from what my classmates mentioned, which is maintaining the perennial care and just overall continuity of the catheter. And now we go to CLABSI.
Okay, so as they said, a lot of the hubs weren't covered. Upon our observation, a lot of the hubs weren't covered with the swab caps, which is very important because that helps keep the bacteria out of the line. We recommend maybe placing some swab cap strips in the patient's room, maybe over the IV stand or something, in case the nurses don't have any caps in their pocket or on their WOW. They can assess it that way, rather than having to run to the med room, because as we all know, running to the med room could take 5 minutes or an hour. It just depends on what happens on your way there and back. So that was a recommendation. And another one was also, maybe having staff consistently check the policy and procedures on swab caps, and hubs. Again, just to lower infection rates. We know it could be cost effective, but maybe weighing the cost effectiveness versus patient infection, might turn out, better. So that's our recommendation on that.
Just to touch on the two, I think for us discussing collectively why we chose these recommendations for the CODIs, I think it came down to accountability. It was really about somebody having to say, yes, I saw it, yes, it was there. I know we chart on it, but it's so many just box clicking. A lot of times, we just want to make sure that there's a synergistic effect between leadership on the unit and the nurses on the unit, and that everybody can help each other out. And since the charge is round anyways in these units, we've seen every time that we're there, we wanted to come up with a recommendation that would implement and require a small amount of time and a small amount of change, because I know change is difficult when applying new steps. Also, for the CLABSIs, I know that the swab cap strips that hang from the IV pole that come in a pack can be expensive, but it has been seen that the compliance is much higher with the strips being available. And I do think, again, it is just time management, which is what we talked about, which in these floors in particular, it's very task oriented, it's very busy. So I think sometimes it's as simple as, oh, I don't have any more caps to put on, I'll grab some, I'll come back, and it just never happens, which makes it tough because it does just get lost in transition of one nurse to the next, and then somebody finally puts them on, but all that time that was gone in between is a potential for infection. So we just thought these were the best accumulative ideas for both units.
And I just wanted to add that it's not always just one nurse. It's a group of people. So you can't just blame one person when, multiple people are taking care of one patient. It's an interdisciplinary team of people.
And through our findings, we found this wonderful flyer.
Oh, okay. It's a little old one.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah, we
actually
need to get a new one. We are working on it.
Oh, yeah. Well, there's a lot of great information on there, and we
Right.
noticed that it's distributed
Like
system-wide.
especially the female urinal and other stuff, right?
Yeah.
The weighing the diapers,
So we can see that steps are being made
right?
to
Even
combat
though
the
it's
situation.
old, but still it's good.
Yes.
There are alternative methods.
Just for the continuous
Yeah, now
education.
we have the weighing scale in the 30-treat room. They can weigh the diapers.
Yeah,
Yeah. Female urinal still we are trying to find.
Yeah,
So if we
definitely.
get the one, then it will be useful
Yeah.
for the females. Good job, guys. I appreciate your time and
Yeah.
effort.
Thank
You have
you.
put a lot of recommendations. Like the securement device, you're talking about the strap for the polycatheters. We use it for the leg bags. But right now, the securement device, what we are using for our patients, there are complaints from the nurses because when we get the new one, just we give them out for 1 month or 6 weeks like trial period, so they have to experience and see whether it works good for the patients.
Yeah.
So there is feedback from them, they don't like that securement device because it's coming off in few hours time. So that is one of the reason for getting the infection into. So we are asking Medline to give teaching, or we are trying to change the company. We are working on it too.
awesome.
And the swab cap for the central line, yeah, of course they are allowed to have some of the swab caps in their packet so that they don't run in between what their task. They don't waste their time. They can hang few in the patient's room. The thing is, if you allow that practice, there will be so many caps hanging on there. Then after discharge, we cannot take it back to the supply room. Whatever is there in the room, we have to throw it. At least they can have one, if not many. That should be considered too. Okay. So when you're saying unit 1 and 2, what are the units?
We went to IMC and ICU.
So unit 1 was ICU,
Unit 1 was IMC.
IMC, unit 2 was
Unit 2 was ICU.
So like how many lines did you check do you have the raw numbers? Like I see only in percentages, I don't see the numbers.
We'll have to get the numbers to you. It wasn't
Okay.
included in the slide,
Right.
but we can.
So it will be more beneficial because we see
Definitely.
usually we do auditing every month. So when we look at
Okay.
ICU, almost we get around 20 central lines, 15 folic caths. Like
Yeah.
so, we need to look at it.
Okay.
And IMC, they are getting better because we started our education 2 months back. We called all the units. It was skill fair like.
Yeah.
Even we demonstrated the practice how they have to insert the catheters, and every day they should think why my patient has the folic cath, why my patient has the central line.
Yeah.
So if it is not necessary, take it out. They
Right.
have the nurse-driven protocol to follow with the folic catheters.
Yeah.
Without doctor's order, they can remove it. Okay, you are all going to be new graduates soon, right?
Yes.
So, what is your feedback about this? What are you going to take away from this? How it's going to be helpful for you?
I think a lot of it for me was, I mean, we learn a lot about CODIs and CLABSIs in school. I feel like because in our research class, things like that, it's just always a topic somebody covers. But I think doing this on the unit specifically, putting yourself in the position of the nurse, it was really easy to see how it happens and just slips through the cracks. So I think just making sure, for me personally, that I keep myself accountable, and if I can't do something, that I ask somebody to help me, because I think a lot of times it's like, you know, as nurses, we're so independent and we don't want to ask for help because sometimes it makes us feel like we can't handle the load that we have, when that may not be the case. It just may be that kind of day, that kind of assignment.
Right.
So I think it's important to ask for help when you need it.
As she said, it's not individual approach, it's the team effort. Single person cannot prevent infection.
Right, exactly.
Only as a team we are going to prevent the infection. So everybody should
Yeah.
cooperate and put your hands on.
Definitely.
So as new graduates, you are going to prevent CLABSIs and CODIs, right? It's
Yes.
not that after putting the line,
That's
prevent the lines. We don't want to put it when it is not necessary,
Yes.
right?
Right.
That's what happens.
Yeah.
So today also we have education program for the clinical supervisors. I was doing the in-service this morning. Again, I have one in the afternoon. So we are trying hard. So I can say now the benefit, the device utilization rate, that's going down. Like when I say device utilization rate, the Foley catheter, if it was used for the patient for 10 days, now it has come down to 5 days. If it was 15 days, it has come down to 1 week. Like, so we want to say, oh no, still look at it. Every day think about it and just let it come out if not necessary. Help your patients to ambulate, give bedpans, and try all the ways to prevent infections. Because you know 2 kinds of infection, right? Community onset and hospital onset.
Yeah.
So if the patient coming with the infection, okay, we treat the patient, it's not going to affect us so much when we report it to the state. But hospital onset infection, any kind of infection, if the patient gets 48 hours after infection, that is hospital onset infection, we are worried about. So CLABSIs, CODIs, ventilator associated pneumonias, all these things we are worried about. So we want to prevent it. So that is the reason we keep on teaching. We want to prevent the infections. Not only that, the patient is coming for laparotomy for removal of tumor. The patient gets the central line Foley catheter. If not removed on time, they get the CLABSI and CODI, which is not expected. So the hospital days are added, right? The emotional status of the patient, how many days they have to stay longer in the hospital. Antibiotics are pumped on them. So because of the antibiotic usage, one of the complications is seeding plus
for sure.
So we don't want our patients to get into such type of problems. So these are all some of the reasons. And also when the patient gets infection, the hospital, the insurance is not going to pay for it. The hospital has to pay for the cost. But patient safety comes first before anything else. That's what we need to remember. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That concludes our presentation. References.
Okay.
Thank